The biggest stories that matter to you the most. Breaking news, John Calipari is finalizing a 5-year deal to become the Arkansas Razorbacks' next head coach, covering college sports like no one else. The biggest guests in sports. We now welcome in Hall of Famer Jim Calhoun.
Such a pride I had, I came to connect.
The legend, Tim Tebow, joins us.
We'll run it back. I like it.
The legend, Herschel Walker. Welcome in, everybody, to a little bit of a bonus edition of the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Torres. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody is having a great night. Hope everybody just enjoyed a wild game in Vegas. I am here. Kansas takes care of Duke. Final score in this one, what was it, 75-72. Duke falls apart once again late. So everybody come on in. Tell me if you can hear me in the chat. It is loud in the arena. We're doing the best that we can here, so please forgive me as we are live here. I might even have to do a little bit of this and just hold the mic like so. Everybody come on in. Let me know how bad the audio is. I'm doing what I can here live from the arena. And boy, oh boy, is there a lot to discuss, a lot to talk about. By the way, full show today. We will talk a little bit about this game. We'll probably talk a little bit about some of the other games. Obviously, this was my focus today. And then I think we do have to talk a little bit about UConn. Your boy Torres was getting blown up because of a Dan Hurley take that I had earlier in the day. So we'll talk about Dan Hurley's sideline antics. And we will, of course, talk about UConn being 0-2 in Maui. What the heck happened? This team had won 17 straight games coming into this one, most of them by double figures. They are now playing for 7th place at the Maui Invitational. So everybody come on in. I appreciate the chat is already humming. We're going to talk about those Duke spin moves. We appreciate everybody joining us. By the way, before we get started, do want to thank our friends and our partners, Cauley Puffs and CauleyPuffs.com. Okay, so Cauley Puffs is one of our favorite partners. And here's the bottom line. It's holiday season, Thanksgiving, you're with friends, you're with family, you're sitting on the couch, you're watching college basketball, you're watching college football, whatever it is, you want a healthy, delicious alternative for your snacking purposes, okay? That's where Cauley Puffs comes in. This is the alternative to that crappy, unhealthy stuff in the grocery aisle. It's baked, not fried, healthy ingredients, avocado oil, no grease, and basically this is what you need for the holidays and for your view. You know, when you're sitting on the couch and you're watching football or basketball, you need Cauley Puffs. For more information, visit CauleyPuffs.com. Try all the different varieties, all the different choices. But here's the cool part. It's Thanksgiving. It's Black Friday coming up. Cauley Puffs is available on Amazon as well. And they have a Black Friday special in which you can get 25% off your purchase. No promo code, no discount, no nothing. All you got to do is throw some Cauley Puffs in your cart, and the 25% automatically is discounted from Cauley Puffs on Amazon, excuse me. So thank you again to Cauley Puffs. We appreciate your support of the Aaron Torres pod. What a snack. Thank you again to Cauley Puffs. With that said, it is a Tuesday night. It is, what is it? It's not quite Black Friday yet. It's Thanksgiving week. A lot of you have time off. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day, listen, I'm here in Vegas. Duke versus Kansas. Yes, I was here for this game. By the way, security has already looked at me once. You don't know the moves that I had to make to get some area to actually record tonight, okay? I had to grease some palms. I had to shake some hands. I'm actually in the Golden Knights press box right now, so I appreciate you coming in. But the final score in this one, it is Duke versus Kansas. Duke loses this game. Final score, 75-72. Couple big picture takeaways, and we got to get to the end of the game because Duke, once again, absolutely fell apart late. You know, as far as the big picture of the game is concerned, Duke came out a little bit flat. It was interesting. You know, you just talk to people around the team, around the program, other media who cover the team. They've been on the West Coast since like Wednesday or Thursday of last week. Remember, they played at Arizona Friday night, so they've basically been on the West Coast, away from home for like 5-6 days. That's not an excuse. I'm not justifying the slow start, but they started off really slow. They rally back by halftime. It was a game, and we had a heck of a game by halftime. It was 41-39 Kansas. Now, the big play, obviously, in the second half, it was the Hunter Dickinson kick. I would actually love some comments in the comment section of, did you guys think it was egregious? Should he have been ejected? I'll be honest, and we're going to talk a lot about referee interactions in a little bit with Dan Hurley, but, I got to be honest, it was one of those where being in the arena, it's tough. It looked like it was intentional, but is there intent? Whatever. But what was crazy about that play is that after Hunter Dickinson got ejected, I think it really put life into both teams. The game was already going well. It was a fun back and forth game, but there was about 5 or 6 plays after Hunter Dickinson got ejected with about 8 minutes left where basically they just went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. We saw the Cooper flag monster dunk basically from the foul line, and it was a great game right down to the wire. Now, speaking of the wire, we got to talk about what happened in the final few seconds. Duke, with about 15 seconds left, gets the ball back, and they call a timeout. Why is that noteworthy? They're trailing by 3. Why is that noteworthy? It is because they called a play out of the timeout. Why is that noteworthy? You know where I'm going with this. If you watch Duke, Kentucky, they call a timeout. Con Knippel, the starting freshman for Duke, does a spin move into the lane. Kansas completely collapses on it, and he has absolutely nowhere to go, turns the ball over. Kansas, this was a 1-point game at the time. Kansas gets fouled. They make both foul shots. Duke did get one last look at the basket, but it was not enough. But why that's relevant, why that's important, why it's interesting is because if you watch the Kentucky game, you know that the exact same thing happened. 3-4 plays down the stretch every single time that Duke had the opportunity to make a big play, they basically peed down their leg. Let's call a spade a spade. There was some urine trickling down the leg in the Duke-Kentucky game. Kentucky fans, you'll remind me, I don't remember all of it, but I know Cooper Flagg had 2 turnovers, including the famous one in which Mark Pope basically called it from the sideline. Mark Pope was basically like, hey, he's going to do the twisting spin, be ready, knock it away. That's exactly what happened. And so, listen, I'm not X's and O's scheme guy, but it was funny sitting on press row talking about, does Duke really run offense or is it a lot of ISO? It's funny. I saw a buddy of mine, actually a UConn fan. We drowned our sorrows. I did not. I drowned it with just some water and coffee. But my UConn buddy was like, dude, remember, we're in Vegas. He's like, I bet Duke tonight, they don't run offense. And so it's amazing. Listen, I'm not here to say John Shire's the worst coach that's ever walked the face of the earth, whatever. But listen, this is a really, really, really talented team. And in the clutch, late in games, in close games, they have simply not come through. There was a scenario multiple times against Kentucky where a basket would have changed the game, taken a lead, made the margin, whatever. And in this game, you absolutely need a basket, spin move, turnover. So for Duke, listen, I don't want to say 2 games that got away from you because transparently, I think Kansas deserved to win tonight, and I think I think Kentucky deserved to win at the Champions Classic. So that's the big takeaway. I see the chat is humming, and I think that's the big takeaway. The big takeaway is, listen, Duke's got to work on late game situations. I'm not scheme guy. I don't pretend to have all the answers and pretend that I'm James Naismith here. Of course, James Naismith, the former Kansas coach with a losing record. I don't claim to be Coach K or Danny Hurley or Jim Calhoun or whoever. But you got to have something better in crunch time in these 2 games. Looking at the chat, I think a lot of you have thoughts on the Hunter Dickinson ejection. People saying that that Kansas probably runs away with the game. I do sort of disagree on that solely because I thought Kansas played some of their most inspired basketball after he got hurt. You could tell Kansas and their bench were pissed off. They were upset when Hunter Dickinson got ejected. Bill Self pulled the Dan Hurley, had to be pulled away by his assistant coaches because he was going to go after the refs. So listen, Hunter Dickinson's great. I thought Hunter Dickinson early in the game controlled the paint. Malowatch, the freshman for Duke, not many times he faces a guy just as big as him, but also more physical. That's exactly what happened. And I'll say this, from the Kansas side of things, A.J. Storr, I thought the big move for Kansas, A.J. Storr was inserted into the starting lineup. For those of you who have been with us since portal season, he was my number one player in the portal. I think he was the best player available, averaged, 17 a game at Wisconsin last year. Sorry, by the way, I'm just going to adjust really quick. But he averaged, 17 a game last year at Wisconsin. And so I only bring it up because he had been off the bench. I think Bill Self has been trying to figure out what to do with him. He started this game at 11 points, had a couple big plays early, and then down the stretch, Kansas just made more plays. So listen, I think this was an important win for Kansas. Kansas, as weird as it sounds, they're the number one team in the country. They beat Carolina at home. They beat Michigan State in the Champions Classic. But at the same time, with Kansas, that Carolina game, they were up 15, 18 points at the half, completely fell apart in the second half, barely held on at home. Michigan State was a very uninspired effort at the Champions Classic. Many of you watched. It was a tough watch. So for them to come out, be the better team from start to finish, I think that was a big deal for Kansas, and I think it was an important result for the Kansas Jayhawks. From the Duke side of things, listen, a couple things stand out. One, Cooper Flagg, to me, I thought he was a little quiet late. Listen, this has been kind of my criticism of Cooper Flagg, is I think too often, I think he tries to get other people involved, and I think that's a noble thing. Like, I think it's a good thing. I'm not saying it's like the worst thing that a basketball player can do, but at the same time, sometimes you just want him to be a little bit more aggressive. And it feels like he knows, I'm the 5-star freshman. I'm the guy that everybody's watching. Let me make sure I get other guys involved first. And it's like, sometimes you just got to take over a game, my guy. Cooper Flagg finished with 13 points, thought he was good. He had, probably 6-8 points in probably the final 10 minutes. So he was good down the stretch, but you'd like to see him be a little bit more assertive early. I will give credit where it's due. Tyrese Proctor, the junior, former 5-star, kind of a kid that we've been waiting for 3. Remember, he came in as a one and done. We thought he was a one and done 2 years ago. He struggled as a freshman. Last year was supposed to be his breakout year. He did not have success, struggled as a sophomore. And this year, I think he's played much, much more inspired basketball, had 15 points in this game. So, really quickly, those are kind of my big picture takeaways for Duke. Listen, I'll say this, listen, since I've been a little critical of Duke, the late game execution, let me also say this. The bottom line is they came out to the West Coast. They beat Arizona. Listen, I thought you had to go 1-1 on this trip. This isn't college football. You don't have to win every single game. And I thought you had to go 1-1 in this trip. They beat Arizona at Arizona on Friday night, in what was a largely dominant win. So to me, I do think that, listen, it's not the worst case. You go back. By the way, you play producer Matt's Auburn Tigers next week in the Big 12, the SEC ACC showdown. Now, I will be honest. I am recording this before Auburn plays Carolina in the late game at the Maui Invitational. So we'll see. Auburn so far is the best team I've seen. They beat Houston. Obviously, I know Houston lost to Alabama earlier in the evening, but Auburn's the best team I've seen. Janai Broome has been the best player in college basketball that I've seen. So Duke, Auburn next week. Cannot wait for that one. Producer Matt, we have any interesting Duke, Kansas commentary before we get to some Dan Hurley? I see some questions in the comments section. Let's see here. Cooper is not in the right position, says Mike Jones. Listen, I'm not scheme X's and O's guy. Mike Jones, I tend to agree with you, brother. Listen, I don't have all the answers, but it just feels like they're trying too hard. Listen, I'm not saying, like, don't get other people involved. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that you have to be a little bit more assertive early in games. And again, you have the combination of the veterans, and you bring the veterans off the bench. By the way, I don't know if it showed up in the stat sheet. I thought some of the vets off the bench played well. Mack Brown transferred in. I thought he played pretty well. 8 points, 4 steals. He's bigger than I thought he was. I'll be honest. It's one of the fun parts of coming to a game. Mason Gillis hit a 3. Sion James had 10 points. So the vets off the bench played pretty well. But I tend to agree with Mike Jones. I don't love how Cooper Flagg was used. Producer Matt, anything else interesting? Duke couldn't get it done with Hunter out. I'm a little worried about John Shire. Kentucky fan says that. So listen. Shire has been good. Shire has been a B+. Shire, you know who Shire almost is? He's college basketball Ryan Day. He inherited an incredible situation. He has done nothing to ruin it. But he ain't the legend that he took over for. You might not like Urban Meyer. He was great at what he did. You might not like Coach K, but he's great at what he did. By the way, fun Coach K story from tonight. Coach K was sitting courtside with his wife, probably about a football, probably 50 feet away from where I was sitting. And after a big play, Duke forced a big turnover, and I looked over to see his reaction. There was no reaction, but I saw somebody going absolutely crazy, and I was like, who is that Duke super fan? Yeah, it was Ken Jeong. That's right, of course, from The Hangover. So all the stars were out here tonight in Vegas. By the way, the reason I'm not courtside right now, there is a second game. It is Furman versus Seattle. I'm not kidding you when I say if there are 250 people still in this arena, I'd be stunned. I'd turn over my computer, but I'd knock over the whole thing. So, listen, if you're just joining us, we talked a lot about Duke's final possession. It was a little bit underwhelming. And, whoever was the last commenter said, a little worried about Shire. He's not terrible. He's recruited well. Listen, Kansas, Kentucky, both games could have gone either way, but let's also call a spade a spade. In both games, Kentucky made the big plays down the stretch, and tonight, Kansas made the big plays down the stretch as well. Producer Matt, we got 1 or 2 more questions before we get to a quick break. Let's see. Oh, first of all, Archangel Music says Auburn was down 18 in their last game. That's the heart of a champion, baby. Yeah, they were down 18 to a top 5 team, and they came back and won. How you like them apples? All right. Let's see here. Anything else? Can't win the big games, Ryan Day. Oh, we'll do more college football this week. By the way, Coach K for sure mad. Yeah, no comment on that. He didn't look too mad to me on the sideline. He looked like he was having a good time. I don't know if he was at the craps tables late last night or what. But Kansas does get the win over Duke. What a game. I'll say this too really quick. Sometimes these neutral court atmospheres are no good. This was absolutely awesome. Credit to Duke fans, credit to Kansas fans coming out before the holiday. I think everybody used this as an early holiday, either going to spend Thanksgiving in Vegas or come Monday to Wednesday, fly back to wherever they're from. But the arena was packed. It was probably 90% capacity, probably more Kansas fans than Duke fans. But we see so many of these neutral site games with no buzz, no atmosphere, no excitement. This one was awesome. All right, so what we're going to do, take a quick break, come back, get to more of your questions, more of your comments. We got to talk to my boy Dan Hurley. Torres is under fire because his coach can't stop getting texts in the worst possible time. By the way, UConn falls to 0-2 in Maui. What the heck is that about? Take a quick break. Be right back. Before we do, many of you ask me all the time, Torres, what can I do to help support the show? You give me hours and hours and hours of content every single week. What can I do to help you? Well, I'll tell you what, do me a quick favor. Check out the Aaron Torres Media merchandise store for all of your team-specific shirts, hats, and more, all available at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. A lot of you wondering, Torres, what can I get in that merch store? Well, first of all, we got our brand new Hope and Pope Kentucky basketball t-shirts. That's right. Mark Pope has arrived. He is here to save the day. Get your Hope and Pope t-shirts there. Also, Arkansas fans, the Big Pig Invasion is here. You can get your tees there. Basketball School Alabama shirts. More Hurley 2024 UConn shirts for your tailgates at Rentschler Field, your games at the XL Center or Gamble. And oh, by the way, your Mike effing Woodson gear for Indiana. If you love football, we got you covered too. We got more Dion shirts and hats than we even know what to do with. The freeze warning has hit the plains Auburn fans, grab your freeze warning tees now. And of course, our new era, new rules shirt applies to Nebraska football and its incredible fan base. We have more coming for the fall, plenty in stock right now. So make sure to check out the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And you can always hit me up with any questions. Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com. All right, everybody. I'm back. Good to be back. I'm guessing you still can't hear me. I am live here at T-Mobile Arena reacting. We just did reaction to Duke versus Kansas. If you have more thoughts on that, feel free to drop them in. I do want to switch gears, though, and I do want to talk a little bit about the UConn Huskies, okay? So here's the bottom line. UConn, as I'm recording here now, it's worth noting, of course, that it is Tuesday night. UConn is playing in the 7th place game in the Maui Invitational this week after losing to Memphis on Monday and then a stunner to Colorado on Tuesday. But here's the bottom line. What most of you care about is Dan Hurley. What most of you care about is him yelling and screaming at the refs. So we'll discuss that first, and then we'll get into UConn's actual basketball problems. By the way, forgive me. I am going to steal a swig of water. My throat is on fire because I am screaming over a loudspeaker here in a hockey arena. So give me a second here. All right. I'm back. Good to be back. All right. So, listen. Recording Tuesday night. UConn will play again Wednesday in the 7th place game. And as a UConn fan, the most interesting thing to me is that UConn, which had won 17 straight games coming into the Maui Invitational, is in the 7th place game. Here's the thing, though. Most of you care about Dan Hurley. I actually had no idea how controversial Dan Hurley is and how angry people got about Dan Hurley, his sideline antics, and are they too much? And we saw it on display in the Memphis game on Monday. So I know it's Tuesday night. Many of you will listen on Wednesday. And I know that the story's a couple days old, but so many of you hit me up, I think we got to talk about it, okay? So for people who missed it, and I don't think you did if you're watching this show, if you missed it, UConn's playing Memphis. Kind of a miracle they were in overtime because they were not very good for the first part of that game, okay? And in that game, it's in overtime. It is tied at 92-92. Liam McNeely, the freshman star who we talked about so much on this channel over the course of the spring when he was being recruited, he drives the lane, goes up for a shot. Or excuse me, I forget who shot it, but he goes up for a rebound, grabs the rebound, puts it back up, whistle called. Everybody in the arena thinks that Liam McNeely is fouled. He's going to the line to take 2 foul shots. Remember, 92-92, tie game in overtime. What ends up happening? No, the whistle is an offensive foul. It is on Liam McNeely. It is on UConn, and it's going the other way. Dan Hurley is irate. Dan Hurley is not happy. And, oh, by the way, they're doing introductions here. If they do the national anthem, I might have to stop here for half a second. But Dan Hurley is irate. Dan Hurley is not happy. And the reason that I bring it up is because he's screaming at the ref and he gets a technical. And what was an offensive foul on UConn became a technical. It became a 4-point possession for Memphis. Memphis goes up 96-92, and Memphis ends up winning the game. And so after the game, obviously the conversation is, did Dan Hurley cost his team a win? But then more importantly, Dan Hurley had a lot to say about the refs. So before I get to my take, let me first have producer Matt. I know the video is probably a day or two old. I'm sure you've heard it by now. But producer Matt, play Dan Hurley talking about the refs after the game.
What went on out there in the game? That over the back call at that point of the game, there was no attempt to block out. There was a player on Memphis that made a half-ass effort to rebound that basketball, and Liam McNeely high-pointed that rebound. For that call to be made at that point of the game was a complete joke. all right? And then for me, I don't know what happened. I might have lost my balance by the absurdity of the call, or maybe I tripped. But if I made that call at that point, I would have ignored the fact that I was on my back. If I made that call, I would have ignored that. I would have ignored that. That was a major, obviously a major. How you could call that while that game was going on, the way that game was going on, is just beyond me. But I know, I've never seen the one ref before. I didn't even know he was a college ref. And then, I'm familiar with the other two, so I'm not surprised.
So that was Dan Hurley after Monday's game, okay? And obviously that commentary lit up the internet. Everybody's fired up. Did he cross a line? Is it fair? Is it not? All of that good stuff. Well, I bring it up to say this. In life, a couple things are true. And as I always say, there are things that seem counter to each other that absolutely can be true. There is no time and there is no place to get a technical in a tie game in overtime when your team is battling to win. I also think if you hate Dan Hurley for who he is, you're kind of an idiot, because that fire in his belly is what makes Dan Hurley, the coach who has won back-to-back national championships. Now, listen, I, of course, as 99% of you know, I'm a UConn alum. I grew up on Jim Calhoun basketball. And I will readily admit, okay, so I'm a UConn alum. And I think whenever I comment on UConn, everybody, if it's too negative, people say, oh, you're not a real UConn person, whatever. But if it's too positive, oh, you're a UConn homer. So let me get this out of the way. Dan Hurley, first of all, let me say this. I actually don't think the foul call was like the worst call that I've ever seen. Now, I don't think it was the best call either. And I think it was compounded by the fact, by the way, on Tuesday against Colorado, there was another controversial over the back that went against UConn. This time, UConn was the team boxing out, and it was called a defensive foul, but that's another conversation for another day. But listen, as a UConn fan, I can tell you, I don't think it was the worst foul call that I've ever seen. I would have preferred that the refs held their whistle. And I will also say, as a UConn fan, that Dan Hurley just can't get a technical. He just can't do that. You have to be under control. Whoever's on the bench has to pull him away. You cannot let that happen. At the same time, though, let me say this. I saw a ton on social media on Monday into Tuesday of, I'm so glad that guy's not my coach, and he's an embarrassment to the game, and this, that, the other thing. Well, first of all, there's literally maybe 2 programs in America that would not trade their coach for Dan Hurley right now? I'm sorry. Ask Duke fans about John Shire after tonight. Would you love to have Dan Hurley? I think you would. Whoever. There's under 5. I can count on one hand. If you're telling me you would never want Dan Hurley as your head coach, I can count on one hand the number of schools that would not trade their coach for Dan Hurley. So stop telling me that he's an embarrassment, he's a clown, you would never want him to be your coach, whatever. Stop it. You would be privileged. You would be privileged to have Dan Hurley as your head coach, okay? So I don't want to hear that part, okay? By the way, second game has started behind me. Again, you can hear the players calling out plays on the court. Anyway, neither here nor there, okay? Bottom line, don't tell me you don't want him as your head coach, but here's the other thing, and this is important. Producer Matt, you can go ahead and clip this off, but I also want you to put up the tweet, okay? Is that Dan Hurley is who he is, and Dan Hurley is a successful coach, okay? But at the same time, this is what matters. For everybody saying, oh, we wouldn't want him as our head coach, that's nonsense. But here's the other thing. What makes Dan Hurley makes him not only a great basketball coach, but the perfect coach for UConn. I tweeted this out on Tuesday morning, and boy, oh boy, did I get some pushback. By the way, I was driving to Vegas right before I tweeted it out. Did not expect the pushback that I ended up getting, okay? But I tweeted this out. I tweeted out a video of the sound, and I said, this is a perfect example of why Dan Hurley wouldn't have worked at Kentucky, because, by the way, the video was a video of Mark Pope versus Dan Hurley. And it says why he would not have worked out at Kentucky, not he was ever getting the Kentucky job. Hurley is perfect for UConn and Connecticut. Feisty, chip on his shoulder, us against the world. His fans love him because he is us. If you're not from Connecticut, you can't understand. And so I put that out. That was really for UConn fans, and that obviously it did not get taken that way by so many others. So first of all, people from Connecticut are soft. Okay, whatever. If that's how you feel, listen, I'm not here to argue with you. I could throw out some stats. I could throw out some this. I could throw out some that. Google some stuff about Bridgeport, Connecticut. Google some stuff about New Haven. Google some stuff about Waterbury. That's neither here nor there. We got some, but it's not just about that. It is about the fact that people from Connecticut, I am here to tell you, we got a chip on our shoulder, okay? We have a chip on our shoulder, and I am here to tell you that Dan Hurley perfectly encapsulates Connecticut and perfectly encapsulates UConn. He's Northeast. He's tough. He's rough around the exterior. He drops too many F-bombs. He is Connecticut. For people who are not familiar with Connecticut, I'm just going to say it. It's halfway between New York. It's halfway between Boston. We get crapped on. Joe Rogan the other day said, Connecticut's just a highway to get to New York City. Screw you, Joe Rogan, okay? I don't want to hear it. But the bottom line is that if you're not from Connecticut, you don't understand. And so to me, I saw a lot of someday it's going to catch up with him. Maybe. I mean, I don't know. Maybe he'll be the next Woody Hayes. But to me, one, he's actually gotten the anger much more under control the last couple of years. But two, and I think this is the more important part. And by the way, I want to be clear. I don't speak for everybody from Connecticut, whatever. I know somebody from Connecticut's going to be like, don't talk about my state. I'm just here to tell you. People from Connecticut have a chip on their shoulder. People from Connecticut, don't like getting pushed around. People from Connecticut, whatever. And Dan Hurley perfectly encapsulates that, okay? And so I solely bring it up to say that I think that attitude is two things. One, it's what makes Dan Hurley, but then also I'm going to take it a step further. It's not only what makes Dan Hurley, it's what makes his fan base adore him because he's one of us. He's like us. He's got a chip on his shoulder. He doesn't let people push him around, and he wasn't going to let those refs push him around. Now, again, I wish he hadn't gotten the tech. But listen, if the alternative is I have a softie as a head coach that didn't just win 2 national championships, then I'm trading a tech in Maui for what I've seen the last 2 Marches when UConn's won 12 straight NCAA tournament games by double figures, okay? So listen, there's nothing else to say about the Dan Hurley stuff. You're allowed to disagree. If you would never want him as your coach, that's fine. Congrats on going to the NIT. Congrats on not winning national championships. Dan Hurley right now, there's 3 active coaches with 2 national titles, Rick Pitino, Bill Self, and Dan Hurley. And so I bring it up. Because if you don't have one of those coaches, don't tell me that you trade them, okay? Whatever. I got people, speaking of Dan Hurley, people swearing. I got people swearing at me in the background. Okay, so that's my Dan Hurley take. Going to have to edit some of that out. Really quickly, I do want to switch gears. And I do want to talk about the actual on-the-court product from UConn, okay? So UConn, of course, has lost. And by the way, producer Matt, we'll probably clip these off separately, so just make sure. I know you always keep timestamps, but make sure. But let's talk about UConn, and let's talk about their performance in Maui through 2 games. And again, for the 1,000th time, we're recording on Tuesday night. UConn plays the 7th place game in Maui on Wednesday. And so stuff could change. They could win the 7th place game by 200 points and everything's good, this and that. But they have lost 2 straight. And I don't think there's any doubt that there are reasons for concern. And so this is kind of the nerdy UConn breakdown. So forgive me, but let's go ahead and dive in. Couple thoughts on the state of UConn. First of all, this is not a Dan Hurley thing. This is not a team thing. I think he's just still figuring out what he's got. Listen, you can go back to last year. Think about last year, okay? He basically, I know the big stat was he lost his 3 best players in the NBA, Jordan Hawkins, Andre Jackson, and Adama Sanogo. But he also basically knew who he had. He had 3 or 4 key returnees, and they were mostly in the same role. Tristan Newton was the lead guy. Donovan Clingan went from backup to starter, but he was basically asked to do very similar things just over a longer period of time. Last year, Caravan was basically the same player. And then you add Cam Spencer and you add Steph Castle to easily defined roles within the system of the team. This year, it's different. And I'll tell you, I went to practice. When I was back in Connecticut, I went to practice. And when I went to practice, what was obvious was they had a lot of talent, but they were still figuring things out. And so you look at UConn, they've been playing 8, 9, 10 guys in Maui because of the fact that they're trying to figure things out and the foul trouble. As far as the foul trouble is concerned, because I know it's been a hot topic for UConn fans, listen, there has been some disparity. Dan Hurley has been very vocal about it. I am not going to pretend that the foul discrepancy is not an issue. If you go to let's take the Tuesday game as an example, a loss to Colorado. Colorado shot 15 more free throws than UConn. Let's go back to the Memphis game. Memphis in that game shot 16 more free throws. So right now in Maui, UConn going into the 7th place game, UConn is what? Plus negative 31 in foul shots, and it has hurt them, and it's hurt their continuity, and it has hurt their consistency. So yes, fouls have played a role. No, I'm not going to blame fouls. It is worth noting both games were winnable if you're a UConn fan, and I know it's not what you want to hear, but it's the truth. I go back to the Tuesday night game again, or the Tuesday afternoon game against Colorado. Alex Garabin, who I love. This is not a criticism of Alex Garabin. This is a fact. He finished 1 for 7 from 3. If he finishes 2 for 7 from 3, UConn wins that game. That's not blaming Alex Garabin. That's just stating a fact. And so I think they're trying to figure out their rotations. I'll also say this. I think some of the guys that they were expecting bigger roles from aren't quite the guys that they thought they were going to be. I'm not criticizing. I'm not saying he's the only problem. But Aiden Mahaney, the transfer from St. Mary's, has not been the guy that I think anybody thought they were going to be. Now, I always thought he was miscast. You can go back to when he committed to UConn in the spring. And I saw people saying, he's their starting point guard. I'm like, you ever watch a kid play? He's not a point guard, one. And I honestly thought he was going to be like the 7th man, first guard off the bench, shoot a couple threes, whatever. And so I think Dan Hurley early on was trying to figure out his role. Can he play the point? Can he lead the offense? Well, against Memphis, it was clear he could not. He could not create offense. He could not beat anybody off the dribble. And then on defense, and this isn't even me like talking smack because Jay Billis and Schulman were talking about it during the broadcast. Memphis was attacking him. Like every single play on defense, Memphis was just going after him. And so I just bring it up to very simply say that he has not been what they thought he was going to be. Samson Johnson, veteran player, has not taken the step that you would have hoped. You hope, remember, last year you go from Adama Sanogo to Donovan Clingan. Donovan Clingan becomes a superstar. You were hoping that you would get some level of that leap this season from Samson Johnson. It has not been that. Terrace Reed, the backup, has probably been better, but Terrace Reed has gotten in foul trouble. And so your 2 starting centers have gotten in foul trouble. The guy that many, not me, but some thought was your starting point guard probably should be like a 7th man. And then obviously, when your big guys are in foul trouble, everybody's playing out of place. There are positives. Garabin has been good in pretty much every game other than the Colorado game on Tuesday. He's a star. He's going to be okay. Liam McNeely was awesome against Colorado, and it is worth noting, by the way, against Colorado, he left the game with an injury and came back and still finished with 20 points in that game, okay? So Liam McNeely has been as good as advertised. I think Solo Ball from the guard position has really made a step, and I am so impressed. He is even better than I thought he was going to be. And so I just bring it up because, listen, there are reasons and there are excuses. I'm not making excuses. But if you're looking for positives, Solo Ball has taken a step up. Liam McNeely has been as good as advertised. Alex Garabin has basically been pretty good except for the Colorado game. And again, I think you have to find a point guard. Is Hassan Diarra going to be that guy all season long? He started there. Then they put him back to the bench. Remember, he was the reigning 6th man of the year in the Big East. They haven't really been able to replace the Tristan Newton role of guy that can just beat you off the dribble. They don't look as fluid. They don't look as comfortable. But I do think it gets figured out. Like I saw some stuff today, and this is not a criticism of other media members, but I saw some stuff about, is this an NIT team? Is this a team that's, this and that? And it's like, they're not going to the NIT. They're going to figure it out. They're really talented. They're just not there yet. And here's the other thing. UConn fans, everybody. I got spoiled as a media member covering this team last year. We got spoiled because that team was historically good. I think for a modern era college basketball team, that's about as good as you're going to get. Think about it like this. 4 of your starters were drafted, 2 in the lottery. Steph Castle has been awesome already. Donovan Clingan has been awesome already. Cam Spencer is in the NBA. Tristan Newton is in the NBA. So UConn fans got spoiled. That was an incredible team a year ago. And so I bring it up because, listen, I'm not here to say that they, I'm not here to sugarcoat it. It's not a perfectly built team, but I think Dan Hurley is still figuring things out. I think they got to figure out the point guard position. I think they got to keep their centers out of foul trouble. And you got to keep Liam McNeely on the court. Whatever it was, I think it was a hip injury. You got to keep him on the court because he is the key to success. All right. Producer Matt, I was going to do a segment on North Carolina football, but I got security on my butt right now, so I got to get the heck out of here. Really quickly, I'm not even going to comment on any other games from today. I did not get to watch Houston, Arizona, or Alabama. I heard it was a thriller. I heard it went into overtime. I'll probably try to watch it at some point, get some reaction to it. Also, worth noting, what was the other thing I wanted to mention? What was I going to mention? Oh, I don't know. I can't remember. Houston, Alabama, I heard was great. Maui finals on Tuesday or Wednesday. Battle for Atlantis starts on Wednesday. But I'll tell you what. Producer Matt, before we get out of here, any interesting questions on Hurley, anything like that before we roll? UConn is a bubble team, says Andrew. I think it's a little early. Listen, I'll say this. We mentioned Duke coming back next week and having to play Auburn. UConn's got Baylor at home on Tuesday or Wednesday night of next week. That's sort of a must win. Otherwise, they have Baylor and Gonzaga. If you don't win one of those two, you're not going to have a resume coming out of conference. I don't believe they're a bubble team. By the way, the Big East hasn't been very good this year either, which kind of helps. Xavier's good. St. John's has already taken 2 or 3 losses. Marquette looks good, but not great. So I don't think UConn's a bubble team. They might be like a 6 seed. They're not going to be a 1 seed that finishes 37-3 like last year, but I don't think they're a bubble team either. Is that anything else? If they win the 7th place game, it's 7th place game Torres. That's a fall early in the season. Needs some serious growth from them against a weak out of conference slate. One thing I will say, if I can be a little critical of Dan Hurley, and I thought it was apparent against Memphis early, UConn in the early part of the schedule. First of all, the charity exhibition, they played Rhode Island. I don't even know I forget who they played in the second exhibition. But remember, Memphis in their exhibitions. Remember, Memphis beat UConn on Tuesday or Monday. Memphis played North Carolina and Alabama in their exhibitions, and then also played Missouri at home, at UNLV, at San Francisco before they even got to Maui. And so I understand why Dan Hurley schedules the way he does, 3-4 kind of cakewalk games. But if you're going to go one of these tournaments like this, I do think you need at least one game to test you a little bit more than New Hampshire and Lemoyne and the teams that UConn played. So, yes, it is 7th place. Jace, I'm not trying to sugarcoat it. I'm not trying to be Homer UConn guy and say everything's perfect and they're the best team I've ever seen. I'm just sitting here telling you I don't think it's as bad as a lot of other people think. Anything else before we get out of here? Hurley gives Pitino vibes being the NBA next year. Listen, we'll see. I still think Dan Hurley is going to wait for that Knicks job. I'll be honest, I don't watch regular season NBA basketball. I hope my Fox Sports Radio bosses didn't hear me say that. But in all seriousness, bottom line is that the Knicks, I think, are playing pretty well. I don't think Dan Hurley is leaving just to take an NBA job. Like, I don't think he's going to coach the Chicago Bulls if Billy Donovan gets fired. By the way, the Knicks in 4th place right now. I need the Knicks to be good. And if you believe him, he did say, by the way, after the Lakers thing, he said, no. This taught me that college is where I belong. Now, listen, stuff changes. We'll see. The one thing I will say is that I don't buy the NBA stuff. The one thing I will say is, they've been able to kind of cherry pick in the portal. It'll be interesting to see the approach in the offseason if things go sideways, because they've been able to recruit the last 2 offseasons as the defending national champs. The good news, by the way, for UConn, of course, they got that elite recruiting class coming in: Braylon Mullins, Eric Ryby, and Darius Adams. Anything else, Producer Matt, before we get out of here? Agreed, they'll be fine over the course of the season, but I am scared of a three-peat, put it that way. I am not scared of a three-peat. I think it's fair. Listen, Jace, I'll be honest, and I give Dan Hurley credit. I also think, I'm not going to be critical of him for doing it, but I do think, it's been interesting to watch. Like, they have openly talked about it. Like, that is our goal. That is the end game. And listen, I know everybody talks about the goal is to win a championship. I'm not saying that that's, unique to UConn, but it's like, I don't know, that puts a lot of pressure on a lot of people. And that's maybe how Dan Hurley operates. That's maybe why he's had the success that he's had. But yeah, I don't, listen, let me say this. Auburn and North Carolina are playing right now. Auburn, as I said, is the best team that I've seen so far. But you start going down the list. I mean, listen, I'll say this as a UConn alum. I watched Kansas and Duke in person, and we can make fun of Duke in the last play of the game. UConn is not even in Kansas and Duke's stratosphere right now. All right, I'll tell you what. I think that's it for this episode of the Aaron Torres pod. I got to get out of here. Security is on my behind I think they thought I was going to do like a 10-minute show. Listen, Torres pushes boundaries. What can I say? I'm a little bit edgy. But listen, if you're not subscribed, please make sure to do so. By the way, I apologize to those of you who are coming for some other commentary. As far as I know Kentucky played tonight. I know Arkansas played last night. But listen, bottom line is there's just there's only so much that I could watch today. I was traveling to Vegas. I'll be here for the holiday. And so let me say this before I get out of here. We'll have a couple clips up on the YouTube channel tomorrow and over the next couple days. But let me say this. This will probably be the last full episode before Thanksgiving. So I certainly hope that everybody has an incredible Thanksgiving holiday. I appreciate so much all of you and all of you that allow me to do what I love. So thank you all so much. Have a great holiday. Spend time with friends and family. Check out the YouTube channel. We'll clip off some stuff. I'll maybe do a bonus clip, North Carolina coaching search. I do want to talk a little bit about that, but this isn't the time or place. And yeah, I think that's it. I would love to stay all night, but security is up my butt, and I think it's time for me to go ahead and get out of here. So thank you all for listening, and we will be back soon. Shout out to Tor and Craig. Shout out to Rachel, who hates my voice. Shout out to JJ Reddick. You F-Ed. Unblock me, bro. I hope everybody has a great Thanksgiving. I hope everybody enjoyed that Duke-Kansas game because it was awesome. I will be back probably Sunday night. By the way, if you love college football, we did our rivalry week preview show today, so make sure to download that. Appreciate everybody's support.